Good afternoon, everyone. Sounds like I was on mute. Welcome to Color 2020, and thank you for joining us this afternoon block where we're going to be talking about power. Who has the power and who controls who gets to tell the stories that we hear today, and what stories are we allowed to tell? And over the next few hours, we'll be talking to a bunch of amazing filmmakers from around the world to just discuss and come up with some solutions on how we redistribute the power so we can give every voice the opportunity to be heard. And we'll start off the afternoon proceedings by welcoming to the stage Lisa Holmberg, who is going to give us a keynote address. And Lisa is a producer and production manager who has been in the business since the 90s. So I'd love to invite her to join me on the stage now and to just give her keynote address talking about the fact that we're in so-called Sweden. Hi, Lisa, you're on mute as well.
Okay, now I'm not mute.
No, now you're not. We can hear you. Welcome, and thank you for joining us. And I will hand over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to inviting me to this Carla 2020 to speak. It's an amazing conference and it's a big honor to be in part of this. My name is Lisa Holmberry and I'm working as a film commissioner in the International Film Institute in Kautokeino. Our headquarters is in the Kautokeino. It is in the middle of Samiland, and it is also in Norway, or so-called Norway. I was born in 300 kilometers from Kautokeino in east, a place called Sevehjauri, and it's also in Samiland, and it's in so-called Finland also. So we Sami people, we are living in 4 different countries in Sweden, Norway, Finland, and Russia. But we were here way before these states were created, their borders. We were here many thousands years before doing the same things as we are doing today. How we know that we have been here before? Of course we have our stories and we have our songs and legends, but also we have our pictures. 200 kilometers from Kautokeino, from our office, there is a place named Alta, and there are a huge stone carving area near the sea. Those oldest pictures carved on those rocks are from 9,000 years ago. And there are lots of stories in those rocks carved by somebody who lived there 9,000 years ago. So there are whole stories. There are not only like a little figure of reindeer or little figure of shaman and drumming and dancing. There are sequences of pictures which are telling whole story about, for example, about a bear hunting. You can see way far away a picture of bear nest, and then you can see steps going, and in the end of those bear steps there are around Sami hunters with arrow and bows to hunting those reindeer, bear. Also there are fishing stories, there are bird stories, there are stories about the reindeer. Not only that the reindeer, like they are, like Finnish or Norwegian people like to say that we were wild reindeer hunters. But in those old stone carvings, we can see the story that 8,000 years ago, we had a whole system, coral systems and fences, and we were using the valleys and waters to herd our reindeer, like we are doing today. When I'm going to Alta, it's so familiar. I can see the stories. Wow. And those stories, they are so familiar. We are still doing the same hunting and fishing and doing the reindeer herding. And there are some pictures, of course, figures of our religious and belief systems, like our guardians and gods and the sun and the moon, which we are using in our shaman drums. And those carvings are from 8,000 years ago. And those figures has been survived in our drums like 8,000 years. Only 300 years ago, when the Christianity came, 600, 400 years ago, when the Christianity came to our Sami land, then they disappeared. They took our drums and they gave us their own gods. So powerful are those stories in those rock carvings. And so I'm very proud of people, my Sami people who are making the stories nowadays. They are creating the future of the nowadays. They are telling stories of our nowadays to those people who are coming after us, like I'm coming. Those people 8,000 years ago, they were telling a story of our people to me. So the stories, the power of the story, and why it's important that who has the power of the story to tell our stories, is because when you are telling the story, you are creating the future. You are imagining the future. You are making the future. And it's very much important that our future, those people 8,000 years ago, created us this future with the fishing and reindeer herding, which we are living here. You know, in those altar carvings, I can't see any oil rigs or windmills or anything like that. And maybe that's why we have survived, because I can see the reindeer and fishing and moose hunting and these things. That's why we have survived. The beauty of telling the stories nowadays, and also in those days, is that you don't have to tell everything. The stories, when you are telling a story, the audience can, the more there is a mystery or secret things, the more they are interested, and maybe more that story is carrying itself. Like in Alta, there are some figures and some sequences of stories which the archaeologists or historians or any scientist people or Sami people, we don't know what are those stories, what are those figures. But the beauty of those stories is the mystery and the secret. So I'm so happy that we are working together with globally with other filmmakers, other indigenous filmmakers, for example, Australian filmmakers. They have millions of years storytelling tradition. So we are combining each other, we are collaborating, we are supporting each other. And the better stories we are telling, the better future we have. I'm so happy to be part of this Carla 2020, and I will stay here for the questions and discussion after Heather Ray's keynote speak. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. That was really amazing. I just love it when I listen to people speak and they articulate stuff that's been floating around in my brain. And I love it when you said that when we're telling the stories, we are telling the future. Because when we think about our generation, for example, now, the way we are learning about the past is through stories, in the forms of films or the books that were written that we have the opportunity to read. And it's also probably what painted the impression of the world that we have now and the sort of decolonized mindset that I guess some of us have, which we're now trying to unlearn. So if there was ever a reason for us to make sure that more people get to tell stories so that they can tell the stories of now to the future, I think you've just given us one. So thank you so much. And I look forward to talking to you later after the conversation with Heather. So we will now invite Heather Ryan to the stage. Heather is a producer. If you don't know her, you've probably seen some of her work. And once she gives her keynote, we'll be doing a Q&A with her. And we'd love to invite you to send us some questions, which you can submit via the YouTube chat. So welcome, Heather. Thank you for joining us. And I will hand over the mic.
Yeah, good morning. I just wanted to say thank you to Lisa, and thank you, Victoria, of course. Thank you, Carla, for having me this year. I really appreciated, Lisa, you giving us the framing and the sense of place and the antiquity of these places where we reside. I think that part of the framing for my conversation today is looking at that so many of these countries, these societies, and these entertainment industries that we exist in are really a colonial state and grounded in colonial practices. And so much of the work that I have been doing in the United States, or what we currently call the United States, has been doing a deeper dive into our entertainment industry and really understanding the way in which it participates in colonial practices and methodologies. I want to start by saying that I am in my home state of Idaho, which is in the Pacific Northwest of the U.S. And I'm on Shoshone Paiute lands. As you go a little bit further north, Limhi, Nez Perce, Nimpu, Snake. It's a very rich part of the country, and I'm really thankful to have grown up here. I am deeply influenced by land, and I'm also have been deeply influenced by my mother, my grandmother, my great grandmothers, my grandfather, and I speak for my family, and I speak for myself and my family. And I've also been influenced by people like John Trudell, who was one of my most important mentors. Also, Merata Mitsa, who was also one of my most important mentors, the late filmmaker Phil Lucas also. So there's been many, many people in my life who have been a part of the circle that I find myself in. And they've been a crucial part of the way in which I have developed power for myself. And I know that part of this conversation is about power. So part of what I want to do is break down the systems of perceived power, particularly within our industries, but also begin to frame a way in which we build power for ourselves that I would qualify to be real power. Our industries, and I'll start with the industry in the United States, what we refer to as Hollywood, because Hollywood, and you may or may not know this, but Hollywood generates about 80% of the world's consumable media content, specifically with film, television, and music. So Hollywood effectively generates the lion's share or the majority of content that is consumed by the world. And Hollywood, what you see on screen in terms of content created from this industry is approximately 80% white. That is changing. It's been changing more rapidly, I would say, in the last 12 to 18 months. But the base system has very much been a system that has created images that reflect the world as being mostly white and mostly male, for that matter. And I think what's important about looking at this is that when you think about a Hollywood and particularly the European marketplace generating the majority of the world's content and creating the illusion that the world is white, you look at the world in reality, and the majority of the world is Asian. About 4.5 billion people are of Asian descent. The world's second largest population are indigenous people, about 1.5 billion. And then about 1.1 or 1.2 billion people in the world are of African descent. And approximately 600 million people in the world are of European descent. So in looking at the world and the way in which the story is being told, you realize that the world's minority has hijacked the world's story, and it is a false narrative. And it's a perceived position of power, but in the reality, it is a very weak position of power because it's an inauthentic view of the world. And so much of what I think that we are doing with our work is beginning to dismantle that system, to deconstruct that system, and beginning to tell a more authentic story about who we are in this world. It's one of our most important tasks. It's our most important work as storytellers, is to disrupt that system that has had a stronghold for a few hundred years. And certainly with this powerful medium, which is filmmaking and storytelling, in the last 120 years, it has created a system that those who we would perceive to be in power have benefited financially, economically, in terms of world systems, controlling governments, controlling economic systems. The mistelling of the story has contributed to that. And I think it's important to recognize the responsibility and power of media and of entertainment. I mean, when you look at the world and what we are dealing with in this planet, you can really see that essentially British and American imperialism are destroying our planet. And British and American media and entertainment dominate the world's story in a very perceivably powerful way. And so in deconstructing this and telling our own stories, we really are beginning to shift the narrative and to see the world more authentically. There are so many ways, not even just in terms of what the world looks like as far as, you know, color and ethnicity and culture. It's also a different story in terms of the balance of gender and the ways in which gender is mistold as a binary system. There are not two genders, there are multiple genders. There are people who have difference in terms of being differently abled in their bodies or neurodiverse. There are so many ways in which we are expressed as human beings, and every single human being is a sacred being. The mistelling of that story and the ways in which entertainment and media has created these kind of standardized norms, like some illusion of normality, has caused incredible damage to us as human beings, to our humanity. And so to begin to evolve beyond that and really see ourselves as authentic expressions of humanity and to tell our stories in all the ways in which we are is a very powerful shift in what is happening in our world. And I think in many ways is creating for us a kind of freedom. And in my opinion, freedom is power. And so we have an extraordinary power in this medium we work with by telling real stories and seeing us for who we really are. One of my issues with the notion of diversity is the idea that somebody who is diverse is somehow diverse to some sort of standardized norm. In other words, we are diverse in contrast to a standardized norm, which effectively is whiteness or maleness or cisgenderness or able-bodiedness or small-bodiedness or whatever it may be. But that's an illusion. There is no standardized norm of humanity. And it's a powerful system that was created several hundred years ago. And frankly, it was created by Europe before Europe even set out to colonize the world. And it was a system that was created in Europe in the couple of centuries before Europe set out to colonize the world. And it was some kind of system of trade war between the North and the South, trying to create their own power, between the North being somehow lighter skinned than the South. And it was created to make money. It was just, and it's something that has, been extraordinarily damaging to, to human beings. And so as we dismantle this and begin to find new ways to create authenticity in who we are, and to anchor ourselves in 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 our real power, and our real power is our relationship to the earth and our relationship to one another. Our real power is in our humanity and our relationship to this earth mother. And when we anchor ourselves in that, we really truly are free. And when we anchor ourselves in something that is true, to what it is to be a to be a human being, something like love and our ability to express love and be connected to one another, that for me is power. There was something in one of our earlier conversations this week as part of the Carla 2020 event where Pipaluk Jurgensen from Greenland said that it's all about the ways in which we connect with one another. And that thought has really remained with me since that conversation, because it is so much about how we connect with one another when we create together. And in that, I think that we can really find a truly powerfully changing world. One of the things that my mother always said to me from a very young age was, we are a part of the circle, not the center of the circle. And I always thought that it was such an extraordinary image, that we are a part of a circle. We are a part of a circle. There's no one at the center of the circle. And one of the things that colonialism has done throughout the world, whether it be the Americas, or for example, in Samiland in Northern Europe, or throughout the African continent, or throughout Asia, Southeast Asia, wherever it may be in the world, one of the things that colonialism has done is centered the colonizer in the center of the circle. And then everyone else becomes a part of this, this circle of labor and resources to be extracted from. And that is an incredibly destructive system. And so as we begin to move perceived power out of the center of the circle, so that we then create an actual circle, we begin to see that power can build in that way. There is no one in the center of the circle. And that idea of there being a norm that everyone else is diverse to, that is that manifests because there has been someone at the center of that circle. And so as we begin to move away from this notion of there being anyone in the center of the circle, but rather it's just a circle we build from, then we can see ourselves begin to build a real sense of power, and our power comes within that circle. And I think that our medium that we work with as storytellers is one of our most important ways of expression in terms of creating culture and creating the future. And out of this conversation earlier in the week, which Lisa was referencing as well, as storytellers, we are narrative designers. We are creating the story. We are creating the narrative. And in that, we are creating the future. There is a quantum expression that is happening when we tell these stories. Stories are ancient, and it's one of our most important notions of power. And so I am so thankful to be a part of this international conversation. I am so thankful to be a part of this international community of men, of women, of all expressions of gender, human beings that are creating in the most powerful way. We have such an incredible responsibility to the young and the old, and we have to take care of one another. I'm true believers in our ability to create an extraordinary future. And our medium, our medium of filmmaking is a contemporary expression of an archaic form, and that we get to do it each day. It's an incredible honor, and we are a part of the circle, and we are not. There is no one inviting us to the table. There is no one inviting us into the circle. That is an illusion because we are the circle. And with that, I will say thank you so much for having me be a part of this conversation and a part of Carla 2020. I'm really grateful. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Heather. That was amazing. I think you summed it up well. How do we move perceived power out of the circle? I think a lot of people would love the answer to that, and maybe that's a task for us to try and figure out. But I think you put it so well that, you know, the world's minority has hijacked the narrative, you know, and it's interesting that majority normally rules. But here we are trying to work out how to move the minority out of the circle so that we can all essentially be free and not exist in a colonial state, as you say. Some questions have come in for you, and so I'll just share some of them with you from the audience. The very first one is, do you see any good examples out there when people finance, produce, or distribute in more sustainable ways?
Do I see, I'm sorry, could you repeat it one more time?
Do you see any good examples out there when people finance, produce, or distribute in more sustainable ways?
I think that's a really good question. And I'm thinking a lot about the commerce of our industry, because I have been in recent times in talking about this idea of decolonizing the industry. Thought a lot about, you know, one of the ways in which this industry, and I'm sorry, I'm digressing a little tiny bit, so I'm swinging a little bit wide, but I'll come back to the question.
Okay.
But with the industry being, you know, a system that participates in colonial practices, part of that is resource extraction. You know, one of the tenets of colonialism is to figure out how to get the most you possibly can by giving the least possible. It's resource extraction, which sometimes includes human energy, extracting, you know, it's human extraction. And I have been proposing the notion that perhaps generosity and integrity are just as important to the bottom line as is this notion of maximum profits. So perhaps generosity and integrity can be one of the value systems that we adhere to, as opposed to just trying to figure out how to make as much money as possible. So I don't know if I have a specific example of the ways in which, I mean, I would certainly reference, and I don't know all the business around the Maya Tailfeathers film, The Body Remembers When the World Broke Open, but I feel like it's a film that it feels to me like it went into the world in a way that it was made with tremendous integrity, and it went into the world with tremendous integrity. The fact that it was distributed by Ava DuVernay's Array, a company that is so committed to integral practices, that to me feels like it's probably an example of a film that was made in the way that we're talking about and that references to the question. But ultimately, I would say that we have to look at the ways in which we are getting paid, the ways in which we are creating sustainability. I think that community-based media is a very strong example of what we're talking about in this question, that when we create content from community, for community, and to keep the economics of the commerce and business of things rooted in community, and to find the ways in which we can mitigate anthropology. If we are mitigating anthropology, I believe we are protecting ourselves.
Okay. And the next question, I love this one. What would a circular economy look like in the industry?
I didn't mention circular economy, but it's funny because I have been talking about it. So I think that there's a number of people who are thinking and talking about circular economy. One of my references for it is, you know, the only woman to have won the Nobel Peace Prize in economics is Eleanor Ostrich, who I believe may have been Swedish. I'm not quite sure, but she was somebody who talked a lot about circular economics. And this is kind of a funny example, but even something like Airbnb, you know, in its conception is the idea that economy is moving in circles in a lateral sort of way, instead of moving from a base of people up into a hierarchy of a corporate structure. So I think there's a number of examples, but in answer to this question, I would refer back to what we were just talking about, which is that when communities create content for and by themselves, they are keeping the economics within that, within community, as opposed to feeding out into a larger distribution system. The film distribution system globally is a system that needs to be checked. It is even, there's even the cliche that it's very hard to get paid by film distributors. It's kind of something that's tongue in cheek within the industry, but let's question that. It's based in, it's entirely based in the same systems that have created these colonial states, which is, again, to take the most you can by giving the very least, and frankly, by stealing. Theft is the basis of so many of these practices. So protecting things by being in a kind of sovereign manner as far as how we conduct business, I think, is a way in which we protect our own economics and create circular economics.
Okay, that's amazing. I know the thing about distributors has always sort of really amused me, how as filmmakers we just sort of accept that you're never going to get more money than your minimum guarantee. Even
exactly. We joke about it.
Yeah, we joke about it, like you're never going to see any more money, but yet nobody challenges it. And then we complain about not being able to have sustainable production companies because, of course, no more money is coming in from the sales process. And that's an interesting one, hopefully.
Yeah, but companies like Array, and I think other companies, for example, that may be women owned or whatever, those companies are creating themselves with transparent economics. Their books are, they're not lying, they're not cheating anyone. They're actually just having integrity in their, in their economics, and that isn't a difficult thing. There's like software that does that. So
maybe that's the solution. The keyword is women, always women to the rescue. Next question we have here is, how do you deal with the power yourself when you do your productions?
That's a good question. I mean, one of the ways that I deal with power myself in my productions is, again, try to actually maintain a fluidity throughout and an integrity in our process. It's also very important for me to create as much opportunity as possible, to be working very, very carefully to find the people by which we can give opportunity that perhaps had not had opportunity previously. I'm really interested in the voices that we haven't heard from. And so I'm consistently looking for those places where we can bring, voices in and bring storytellers in, bring creatives in, bring artists in who would have the opportunity to be able to tell stories and tell stories in a very different way. I find tremendous power, again, in creating the circle and creating the circle in a way where you leave no stone unturned. And so it's, I have been endeavoring to work in the system, if you will, and then working with companies such as Amazon right now, trying to bring as much visibility to folks that maybe wouldn't have otherwise been connected. I'm trying to do that on a global level. I'm trying to do it in so many ways. And so I've created power for myself by endeavoring to create opportunity. And certainly I've had a lifelong journey of endeavoring to create opportunity for Native and Indigenous people. And that has to do with obviously my own Indigenous heritage and conversations that I was happening with my mother and my grandmother and my great grandmothers, who were all saying to me, you have to make a difference. And so, I think many of us are very, very informed by our families. And that has been one of my deepest sources of power, is hearing my grandmothers, hearing, those voices of elders and those just encouraging me to keep going, and to create, finding ways to challenge things, and to really stand up, to speak truth to power. That for me has been part of my own system of building power.
That's interesting, because I think every generation has a responsibility, and we're all continuing the fight in a very different way. I think, of course, our fight is probably not as physical as the previous generations had to fight. And I don't know, I guess, at what point do we stop? Because I'm still fascinated by this notion that we are actually fighting the minority. It should be quite easy to take down a minority, yet it just feels so hard and so tough. So in terms of like the education, how do you think we can change the media education hierarchies? Because that's probably one of the problems as well, because that's where we begin to paint this illusion of power.
I think that data and research has been really extraordinary in recent times. I was not aware, I mean, I've always been a student of history in my own way, and I think it's important for all of us to be that, because we have to understand where we have come from, and at the same time, understanding data and so many of these industries work from statistical analysis. All of these big streamers, these global behemoth streamers, all work from algorithms. And I didn't quite understand the power that data had really until I started studying it further, and I started working with an organization in the US called Illuminative, which was founded by a friend of mine, Crystal Echohawk, and is entirely rooted in, the organization was founded on data and research, specifically a project called Reclaiming Native Truth. And in the Reclaiming Native Truth project, and some of the work that Illuminative did subsequently, that's when we learned that Native and Indigenous representation in American media, American film and television, we make up 0.1% of representation in American film and television. So if you step back for a moment and think about that, when we spoke earlier that Hollywood is generating essentially, approximately 80% of the world's content, Indigenous people are the world's second largest population and make up 0.1% of representation. That's an extraordinary erasure, and it's deliberate. It may not be consciously deliberate, but in the construct of the American psyche and in the construct of the global colonizing psyche, it's very deliberate, and it serves a purpose. It serves a purpose. People benefit from that and contributing to this notion of the vanishing minority, which is so often the trope around Indigenous people.
Yeah.
It's extraordinarily destructive. I call it extermination by narrative, because the reality is Indigenous people manage about 25% of the world's surface. Wow. And Indigenous people manage and protect 90% of the world's biosphere. Nobody is benefiting from the erasure of the presence of Indigenous people. So I think that there's incredible power in understanding data and understanding you have to fight that system with their own system. Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense. I could talk to you all day. Suddenly we're running out of time, and there's just so many more questions coming in for you, but we have to bring Lisa back into the conversation. And so we welcome her back to the stage so we can, I guess, try and come up with some solutions. Hi, Lisa. Thank you for joining us again. Can you hear us? I think you're on mute.
She's muted, yeah.
Okay, I'm here.
So thank you for joining us. I think we all agree on one thing, that there's a problem and that the power needs to shift. And again, going back to this notion of, they strengthen numbers, majority rules. I am wondering how do we fix this? Because we know that there's a problem and we know that we want to change it. So how do we redistribute the power? Because if we, rely on data and just go strictly by numbers, we kind of have the power, Indigenous people across Europe, America, Africa, Asia. So why are we giving into this illusion?
Well,
Lisa, please. Tell us.
To me, it's important that the education is very important, that we could use as much our education power in our communities, but also in the worldwide, to telling what is important, how is important, how these our connection to the earth and to the waters and to the whole world is important, and how it is. So to me, it's most important that we could, the indigenous communities, we should have our own scholars, our own researchers, our own people, not only doing the work, but also they're on the top of the research, which to make a difference. And now we don't have. We are having those white people schools and universities, and that's my big goal, is to get the Arctic Indigenous Film Academy, where we can teach our own storytelling traditions, our own history, like those stone carving stories which are there, which are like saying, but they are not matters. They are matter. They are very much important.
Yeah, because listening to the two of you, one of the things that came out of this for me, one thing I was reflecting on was whether, as the so-called perceived minority, even though we know that we are not the minorities, but of course, one of the big tools of any form of colonization is divide and rule. And I do wonder whether we have to educate ourselves, you know, outside the perceived majority, what our own power is as the excluded people. Because probably if we come together, maybe we can actually effect that shift, because the reality is we do have the numbers. So I'm wondering why, well, I guess I know that what colonization does. I know that we've all been sort of forced to think that we're separate and we're probably each other's enemy. Most certainly when I think about Native and Indigenous people, the narrative you see in documentaries is always the lost tribe or the dwindling tribe. It's never really about the strength in numbers. So I guess for me, my reflection from all of this is, how do we come together? How do we power up to change this structure for us to, you know, shift the circle, maybe enter the circle and make the circle. I love what you say, like there's no there's no prototype for humanity, because diversity can sort of suggest that we are the other and we are all just human. So how do we move into that circle? Like can we come together and do that?
I think to the point that what you just said, Victoria, is that we have to completely, I think, dismantle this idea of the other and begin to be human beings in the most authentic way. One thing that I think is important is that there has been a sort of model of storytelling that has been created by this industry, storytelling as we know it, as far as filmmaking, creating television. So for the past 100, 120 years, there's been certain ways that stories have been told. Even the act structure is partly based in, the Greek classics or whatever it is. I really truly believe that we have to begin to dismantle that system as well, and to go deep within, go deep into the cultures that we come from, the families that we come from, the regions that we come from, the land that we come from, the communities that we come from, and find that way to clear the space, to become a clearing in such a way that we can tell stories, just drawing from almost on a cellular level who we are. Because even that system of storytelling, those tropes that we draw from, it can create a system to where, let's just say as tribal people, for example, from whatever region of the world we come from, it's almost as if we're taking these sort of images that have been created and told about us. We've internalized those images and we're just recycling them to create more content. And I think we have to stop that process. I think we just stop that cycle, break that open. And it's almost as if just to create a clearing by which we can begin to tell stories from the depth of who we are and in the most truthful and honest way. Everyone comes from varying cultures, whether or not you are from a tribal culture, from within a region or some part of, in one of the Asian continents, wherever it may be, we all come from a storytelling tradition. And I think to begin to draw from that and to create things that are so entirely, you know, just vibrant and real is really important. And to cease to be sort of regurgitating or recycling images that we have been fed about who we are. And that goes for women, you know, just in general.
Yeah. But how much of that also has to do with who gets to, I guess, distribute the stories as well? Because, you know, like you were saying, Lisa, you know, stories are all around us. You know, you can find them etched in rocks. And so as human beings, we're always telling stories to each other. Because now, as you pointed out earlier on, Heather, is that things are looking like they're changing and they're beginning to invite diverse voices. But I've always been slightly disturbed by this notion of the colonizers leading the decolonization process. And I do wonder whether that's the reason we kind of have the same stories being recycled to us, because are they bringing in the voices that suits their perception? So do we also need to look at decolonizing the distribution of stories process? Because I don't think there's an issue with us telling stories. We're all telling stories, but how do we ensure that we have that power to make sure that the stories that we want to tell about ourselves are the stories that people hear about us?
Yeah,
Lisa?
We need our own Amazon, Heather. We need our own platform where we can put all our stories. But about this distribution or production and distribution of our stories, there is also that we have to trust our stories.
Yeah.
Like a Sami story, it's not linear, it's a circle. And you can jump on in every part of that story. You can jump on in and jump out, and you are still in listening and part of the story. But we don't trust it anymore. We trust only this Aristotle, so that it's starting and ending. Our stories are going like this.
Yeah, that's the thing, because I think also our mindsets have been decolonized because our education has also been shaped by the so-called colonizers. And I guess my hope for the future is that, you know, they always say that once you acknowledge that there is a problem, you can begin to change it. And I hope that now that we're all, I guess, aware, or as the millennials would say, woke about it, hopefully we can begin to make those shifts internally, so that together we can begin to engage with like-minded people and really just move into those circles and just own our place and realize that we don't have to wait to be let in. So I would love to thank you ladies for joining us. I'm so sad that we can't continue because I think this is such an interesting conversation that I would love to have, but we have to now move on to the rest of the program. But thank you very much for joining us. And I believe you'll be leaving the stage now. And this is quite interesting because I'm introducing myself coming in to do a speech. So thank you so much for joining us, Heather. So thanks everybody. And I guess you'll now be listening to me talk about how to carve one's place in the film industry. Good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here today with all of you at Carla 2020. I'm Victoria Thomas and one of the program advisors for Carla, and also one of the moderators for the many conversations we're having across the weekend. I was asked to talk about carving out one's place and to share some insights from my journey about how I carved out my place in the film industry. I have to admit that when I first heard the topic, I was torn between two moods. I was slightly amused, and then I was also slightly confused. Partly because on one hand, I had never really considered the possibility that there was a place, or that I had to carve out one, or that I had been carving out one. And so for me, preparing for today has been a process of reflection on my journey, almost like a before and after special in the magazine. I had to think back to where I started, what my expectations were at the time, where I wanted to be, and where I exist today. Currently, I occupy two places, one as a filmmaker and the other as a film educator. As a filmmaker, I work across documentary and fiction. As a film educator, I'm currently the course director for a Master's in International Film Business program at London Film School. And the question I guess I was trying to answer when I was doing all this reflection was whether or not I did carve out a place deliberately and consciously, or whether it was subconsciously, did these places spring up because I was reacting to the world around me? Or is it possible that I exist in a place that I actually had no say in creating, but it was a place that was created by the dominant culture and I was forced to exist in it? I know I went into the film industry full of energy, thinking I was there to learn about the tricks of the trade, to be able to make action and thriller movies and sell them. But because I knew no one in the industry, I felt like going back to university, film school quite specifically, was a way to learn about the industry and find the pathways to a film career. Because when I first went to university, I was 16 years old. I was really young. And back then I was there to study for what was considered a normal job by my family, which was to train as a lawyer. When I went to film school, I was in my late 20s, which means that by that time I had had a lot of university education already and lots of years in the working world as well. So this was very much a conscious career change for me. But I wasn't sure whether it was going to work out, and I knew I had a backup plan in law. And so I enrolled in a film school and told no one in my family. I could keep it a secret because I skipped town. I moved from England to Scotland, and I worked out that the train journey between London and Birmingham with Edinburgh was about 5 hours. So nobody in my family was going to be stopping by unannounced anytime soon. And it worked. I could literally explore having a film career in a film school without anybody in my family finding out. And that was hilarious. But what I discovered when I got to this film school was a curriculum that it reflected the world that the artists lived in at the time through the screening programs, because we had to watch a lot of films and we had to talk about them. And that was actually something I was looking forward to because, I enjoyed watching films. But when you're making film in a world that was legally racist, sexist, or homophobic at the time, chances are if your art is reflecting that world, you're probably going to posit those images as incredibly normal. What I was not prepared for was the fact that my tutor, who was curating the screening program, was very rigid and adamant that only art could be discussed and not politics, which was what he considered the overt racism and sexism to be. And here I was Black, I was female, and having to sit through a lot of abuse in the name of art. During tutorials that were one-to-ones, when we were trying to talk about the films that we wanted to make as short films for our portfolios, I discovered that a box existed when you looked like me. Women made films about women's issues. Africans made films about poverty, war, AIDS in Africa for European audiences. And I wanted to make crime and legal thrillers because, I'd spent my years in the legal world. And I was told quite pointedly that that was not my voice. I find that really hilarious. I knew the industry had a gender problem because, of course, the statistics were widely publicized. So I figured that maybe part of the issue was that I was a woman. And like most places in the film industry, even the film school and the faculty was dominated by men. And so I wanted to actively seek out female spaces. And fortunately, at the time, there was a lot of energy around women in film in the UK. And so I began to sort of engage with these spaces, thinking that, well, I could potentially find, like-minded women who wanted to make legal and action thrillers. And I found them. But what I also found in these women in film spaces was that a lot of the times when they talked about women, the assumption was that women were white. And so in the diversity conversation and campaigns, it wasn't abnormal to hear, and I think we still hear that a lot in the UK, women and BAME. And I remember talking to somebody who was organizing a scheme in the film industry for women and BAME filmmakers that were underrepresented. And I sort of asked her what I thought was a rhetorical question. And I said, what am I supposed to apply as? And she was like, what do you mean? I was like, well, you're looking for women and BAME filmmakers. I would love to apply, because you reached out to me and said, we are looking for people from underrepresented groups. And she said, yeah. We have women, but of course there's room for BAME people too. Now, BAME, for those of you who don't know what it means, it's a catch-all term in the UK for everybody that's not white. And it's an abbreviation which means Black and minority ethnic. And she didn't get the point that I was trying to make. And so I spelled it out for her. And I was like, well, you do realize that I am BAME, but I'm also a woman. And there was this awkward silence that let me know that she had not really thought about it. Because one of the things that I frequently found in the women's spaces was that women were assumed to be white. And so yet again, I began to feel that perhaps that was not a place for me. Nowadays, there's a name for it, intersectionality, but back then there wasn't. So I thought that maybe I would try the place where I was not likely to look like an other. Africa. A lot of people there were Black and looks just like me. So I went on this journey, Nigeria specifically. I probably deserve a Guinness Book of World Records for having the most stolen and appropriated intellectual property prior to the original scripts being made in the Wild West of Nollywood. And I also discovered that distinctions were being made between Africans that lived and worked on the continent and those that did not. I was now not African enough in Africa as an African who also happened to be British. And that qualification, quite interestingly, was being made by a lot of European funders who were now the primary curators and funders of African storytelling initiatives. And that's when maybe I actively decided to carve out a space where I had to stop asking for permission to be a filmmaker, permission to be a woman, permission to be African, just permission to be. So I came back to the UK, quite content to be what I realized people in the diaspora are, citizens of nowhere. And what I then decided to do, I guess, was to try and get the business knowledge so that I could create the infrastructure that would allow me to have my creative freedom and tell the stories that I came into the industry to tell. Legal and crime, thrillers, and action movies. And now that I am doing that, some of the same people who stood in my way with all these qualifications about what I should be doing or not are now saying to me, well, you're doing so much. Why? And I have only one answer for every one of those people. I quite simply had to. Okay, that's quite interesting. I guess I should be thanking myself, but I won't. So we'll keep it closer to home in Scotland, and I would love to invite two dear friends of mine, all the way from Glasgow, Moyo and Marayo Akande, who are going to give us a short activist speech.
Hi, I'm Marayo Akande. I'm a BAFTA and BIFA nominated screenwriter. I also act, direct and produce.
Hi, I'm Moyo Akande. I'm an actor, producer and filmmaker.
We're the Akande sisters, a producing duo. We create international content with our production company, Lucid Dreamers,
with a focus on character-driven stories from a fresh perspective.
Our short film, 1745, tells the story of two sisters who flee their captors and escape into the wilds of 18th century Scotland.
How do you run one day? Take your ear for this in Virginia.
It highlights a forgotten part of Scotland's history.
1745 was BIFA and BAFTA nominated. It screened at major international festivals around the world to great acclaim, and we are currently developing it into a full-length feature film. The Black Lives Matter movement has reignited a conversation.
1745 is part of that conversation.
And that conversation is long overdue.
The film industry continues to impact racism and discrimination in the world.
We created our stories to change the false perspective of Black people in film.
Black characters are often portrayed in stereotypical roles.
And Black actors are often rewarded for these stereotypical roles, but are rarely rewarded for portraying positive role models.
We want to see stories that reflect the society that we live in. Black women on screen are often misrepresented.
Historically, Black women have been treated as less than human in many contexts, including the sciences, popular culture, law, and everyday life.
When Black women's experiences are presented in film, they lack the full range of real-world experiences that include real human emotions and educational achievement.
We carry a double burden, fitting into two minority groups, people of colour and women.
It's vital we represent an array of female characters on screen. One false stereotype of a Black woman is damaging to the world's view of who a Black woman really is.
In my mind, I see a line. And over that line, I see green fields and lovely flowers and beautiful white women with their arms stretched out to me over that line. But I can't seem to get there no how. I can't seem to get over that line. That was Harriet Tubman in the 1800s. And let me tell you something. The only thing that separates women of color from anyone else is opportunity.
In the past, we rarely saw diverse stories that depicted our everyday lives, but recently, stories featuring people of colour at the forefront are being made.
The people who have the power in the UK, such as financiers, government funding bodies, producers, need to fully support the Black gaze in front and behind the camera.
Having worked on various TV shows across the UK, it's actually shocking to say that I have never worked with a person of colour who was a HOD on set, and it's very rare to see a person of colour as a crew member working on a film or TV set.
Hair and makeup is a major and growing issue within the film industry. A lot of HODs don't have experience working with people of colour because we're not usually cast as leading roles, so there needs to be a change.
Productions have to hire people who are experienced, and then they can teach others about the requirements people of colour need for hair and makeup. One weekend or week training course just doesn't cut it and doesn't compare to someone who has over 20 years experience in the industry.
This affects our experience on set and it alienates us as we're having to do our own hair, do our own makeup. And I mean, I've had experiences, and others have, where Afro hair has been referred to as wild and crazy because the texture is different from Caucasian hair. It's insensitive and offensive.
The list goes on. I mean, I've had personal experiences and heard about incidents where a stunt double on set is painted black because there are barely any black stunt doubles on the official stunt bar. Our industry needs to undergo retraining so that everyone in front and behind the camera understands and respects each other.
The industry has the power to support the next generation of filmmakers by creating opportunities for them, such as internships, where they get the chance to work on set or make their own films.
Productions have to look outside their circle when hiring HODs and crew, not only casting, they just need to start hiring them. There are so many talented and experienced people out there. If only they would look, they would find diamonds.
Our gaze can only continue to grow if the door stays open. The Black Lives Matter movement isn't a phase. It's something that should be ongoing until it becomes normalized.
That was amazing. Thank you so much, Moyo and Mirayo. And if you have not seen their short film 1745, try and watch it. It is quite an experience. It should be available on Vimeo. I would now love to invite onto the stage the president of Women in Film and TV International and the director of Carla 2020, Helen Confist, and Regina Much, who is the programmer for Carla.
Thank you very much, Victoria. And thank you all who have contributed these 2 days so far, and all of you who have been here. For us who have worked with Carla for a couple of years now, it's such a joy. When we started to plan for Carla, it was planned to be a physical event in Karlskrona, Sweden. Then we had a pandemic coming, and life happens to us. This program item was called Trauma and Why Stories Keep Us Alive. And we have had very good discussions with the two women you soon will meet about it. But then life happened in Lebanon. I'm awfully happy that Danielle Davy, who's a visual anthropologist, and Miriam Sassin, who's a producer, decided to be here today. And we also decided to talk more about the current situation. And as a WIFTI president with a big mission to gather people together, I encourage all of you to listen, and to put a lot of solidarity in your heart. Welcome, Miriam. Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you so much.
Welcome, Danielle. I hand over to Regina, who will ask.
I'll hand over to you, ladies.
Hello. Fantastic. Yes, I think. Thank you so much, Danielle and Miriam, for joining us here. It really means a lot that you take the time to talk to us. And this session is about trauma. It is about making films in deep crisis, and it's also specifically about Lebanon and you know how Lebanon and the people and the creative people in Lebanon have dealt with crisis and being creative in crisis in the past, and also, of course, after the most recent events in Lebanon, the blast on August 4th. Miriam and Danielle, how are you both today?
It's a difficult question because it's between the gratitude of being alive and I guess like feeling completely lost because nothing we know is the same anymore, and we feel we need to rebuild our entire life. This is how I feel. I don't know for Danielle.
I second Miriam. She has the right words. Yeah.
And you know, when Lebanon has gone through difficult times and times of crisis in the past, the war, the financial crisis, you know, can you talk a bit about what the solutions were that were put into place, both by the industry, so to say, and also by the creative people themselves? Can you talk a bit about that?
Well, I don't know if we need to go back to the history of the Lebanese cinema, but when we were talking with Miriam, we to prepare a conversation with you, we noticed that it's been 10 years that Lebanese cinema was having this kind of momentum of change, and a lot has happened in terms of storytelling and new, maybe financial plans. And what is interesting is that we know that it's a kind of new generation that had the desire to reinvent, experiment, and try to make films that looks more like us. And we had seen workshops, film markets, festivals, special screenings, funds, art houses, and even new financing desk or new possible co-production. And all that was, I guess it all participated to sort of recreate our non-industry. And because still today we can't say we really have an industry in our country. And all this initiative seemed utopian because our country is unstable economically and politically. And we can't all depend on the state or country to be sustainable. So most of our initiatives were based on foreign funds. But I'm not sure that it's what we want. And maybe I can let Miriam continue.
Indeed, like I started working in the film business 10 years ago, and it was indeed a moment where a lot of change was happening to our cinema, partly because of the rise, the more and more creative producers starting to work, a new generation of filmmakers who really were tired of seeing almost the same Lebanese film happening. There was like a very similar narratives. There was a lot of films about the civil war, and we felt with a lot of other filmmakers that there was nothing telling about the current society we're living. And of course, my generation is the generation born at the end of the war. And so we had different stories, and we really didn't connect with the stories that the elder generation was doing. And so there was a lot of work on trying to see how we could make films in a country where there was no funds, no public funds. And so we started following the model of the films that were done before us, which were mainly French co-productions, because it was the only country we had signed an official agreement with. And then with that, we started discovering that not all the stories we wanted to tell were interesting for the French like co-production or the French funds. And we were a bit frustrated by a lot of projects that were not getting funding. And at the same time, there was a rise in the Arab world of several funds in Doha, in Abu Dhabi, in Dubai, that allowed somehow of an independence, because they really wanted to help Arab cinema. And so we had, for the first time, like funds that came to our projects where we were only competing between each other as Arabs. And also that allowed us to make films we wanted to make, as long as they were in small budgets. So documentaries really starting to happen more and more, and directors felt free to make films without really following the ties of TV channels or they were really free as long as the budget was under $100,000. And fiction was always more problematic, because fiction costs more and is more heavy, and we still were looking for ways to adapt. And with time, we started realizing that we were not really thinking about the audience, and we were really making films that were aimed to circulate in festivals and like to bring attention towards our country and like help directors emerge, but not really films that would help, sustain some kind of economical, financial model. And so we started thinking in different ways. My colleague Antoine Waked and I, we were always frustrated why we didn't receive anything but art house dramas. We were a bit tired of these. We felt somehow we were receiving at one point really the same story, but in different setups. It was always a Lebanese guy who was abroad, comes back to Lebanon, either to bury his father or his mother, or to settle the heritage of the house, and then he recovers the country and goes on a trip. And you're like, but why is everyone writing the same story that is becoming redundant? Like the first two scripts we read were interesting, but then it became like different interpretations of the same topic, and we felt there were a lot of things happening. And we were wondering, why isn't there any horror movies coming from Lebanon? Why isn't there any thrillers, sci-fi films, fantasy films? And when we started asking around the filmmakers we were working with, everyone was saying, you know, those films, they're like commercial, it's badly seen if we deal with those films. It can't be, they're not like, it's B-series films, and also they cost a lot. Like, we don't want to be associated with this kind of cinema. And we didn't feel this way, because in all genres, there are good films and bad films, or like commercial films and highly artistic films. So we decided to create a fantastic film festival that we called Maskoon, which means haunted in Arabic. And that was mainly oriented in the beginning to the Lebanese film scene, to start showing them that genre films can be like highly artistic films that also tell about the society, and that also reflect a very editorial line or themes, etc., or a visual style. And so we started bringing in films that would come from all the parts of the world. We tried to bring in films from countries that that are similar to our country. So we brought films from Iran, we brought films from Greece, we brought films also like, we went through Mexico, Iran, we have brought a film from Russia. Like, we tried to show films that were made with small budgets, that were very indie, that had some political context. And we tried to bring in also a bit the filmmakers. We were doing also panels about the genre filmmaking. And in the second year, we launched a competition for Lebanese genre shorts. And to be honest, this festival like grew very big in terms of like audience appeal, and in terms of how much the filmmakers, especially the young ones, connected to us. And from the second year when we launched this short competition, we received around 40 shorts. Not all of them were genre, because no one really knew what genre is yet. But almost 70% of these films were made just for our festival. And when talking with Danielle, we were trying to analyze a little bit why this this second edition festival would, you know, trigger filmmakers to do shorts for it. And we believe it was because the people behind it, were affiliated to the lead production company in Lebanon. And we have been very active at that time. It was 2016. We had premiered a film in Cannes. We had we were almost premiering every year a film in a big festivals. And I think a lot of the young filmmakers wanted to work with us, or wanted, you know, a way to connect with us. And the festival was a much easier entry, because, you know, you are showing films, you are hosting panels. It's not the same framework as, you know, meeting with a filmmaker to do his project, and it's a much lighter way to meet. And so we received a lot of traction, and it allowed us to help to work with those filmmakers and stay in touch with them, which led the competition to grow bigger every year. And every year we felt that the films were getting more genre-oriented, more politically driven. This year we had a lot of dystopian films, which were made before the October Revolution, but really when we see them today, they really tell something about the state of the country before everything, you know, fell apart. And all of this triggered us, for us as producers, to start also developing our own films that were genre. So we started working on our first horror film, and then we have a political thriller ongoing, we have a dystopian film. And so it really allowed us to shift with the filmmakers we work with and give somehow the feel of, for the young filmmakers, that you can do other films than what you are used to see from Lebanese cinema. Like, these are successfuls, the one we've been seeing in festivals, but it doesn't mean other films wouldn't be successful.
That's very interesting, and it really, there seems to be really this urge, right, to this creative urge, and for young people and filmmakers to express themselves, and that I find quite interesting. And if we go to sort of, you know, today, what's you know, what has happened, what is happening now, what do you feel like, what is it that you as individual creatives and also sort of your collective creative community, what is it that you need right now? How can, you know, a global community, for example, also help to, like, not, you know, kill this creative urge that's really coming from you all filmmakers, but, you know, continue to sort of lift this up even after this horrific tragedy?
Maybe there's different levels of answers, because there's the help from funds, okay, but our society and what we're living today, and especially after the blast beginning of August, I think there's it's not anymore what kind of storytelling and audience and financing plan we can think of. It's because even if we get funds today, the banks here are blocking our money, so we don't have access to funds. So it means, in the terms of co-production, we have to think differently, and we have to think how to make our films. And I feel that we're way more dependent today from abroad than before. And yeah, I mean, with the COVID and our own political and economic crisis, Lebanese cinema was adapting, and I mean, adapting very difficult. It was unbearable, but trying to find solution with how to bring money in, you know, the cash flow, how to bring money to the country, who will come from France with a suitcase with cash and things like that to make our films. But I think what said Miriam, that after the August 4th, the blast, I mean, we don't, the question we were asking ourselves with Miriam is, do we really, what are we doing here? And are we able to make movies, or again, or what kind of stories? I mean, we can see filmmakers and journalists on the ground today, but I don't know what is left from the desire of, you know, telling stories. Or yeah, I don't know if Miriam, you have something to say about that.
Yeah, I agree with everything you're saying, Danielle. The thing is, we've been really adapting to a lot since October. Sometimes I feel like I don't know how a human being can adapt so much, because in addition to the revolution and the inflation, our money was blocked, and then like the pandemic was happening, so we were stuck in this place with everything. Like the poverty rate was increasing, and in August 4, like before August 4, we started coming together and talking with the other people from the cultural sector and the cinema industry to think about how we can, you know, survive this, and how we can still manage to fight what was happening. Because even before the blast, culture had no space anymore. Like the cinemas were closed, the theaters were closed. And it was not only because of the pandemic, it was because of the fact that it wasn't a priority anymore. The priority was for food, it was for medication, and like it really felt sometimes when we were talking about the necessity, you know, of screening films or or doing something related to culture, as if we were living on another planet and really disconnected from the tragedy that was ongoing. And so we started thinking about maybe civic cinema screenings where we would talk about politics in addition to like using film to talk about something else, or also to make fundraisers to help certain causes. And really it was starting to happen in June, July, and then August 4th, like the blast happened and suddenly a whole part of the city was destroyed. It was the part where most of the film companies and a lot of the artists and galleries and musicians live. So it felt like our sector was really killed, like in addition to the destruction and the fact that a lot of people actually died. But like it really felt like everything we were working for there was something that came and completely destroyed it. And now it's really hard. Like I had launched the pre-production of a feature film on the 3rd of August. And we had spent a month trying to figure out how we were gonna make it, and with the banks and Danielle was talking about. We really were putting it together. It was like a Lego sculpture. And then on the 4th, the country explodes. I really took it as a sign, as maybe we should not be making this film or films at that moment, because this is not just the timing. But I believe it's too soon to answer your question, because we really don't know. We are in a momentum of time where we really don't know what is the urge to create anymore. And I think in that sense, maybe this is how the international community can help, like by triggering us to keep thinking about culture and arts, because in the place where we are living, it doesn't seem there is a space for it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for sharing. Thank you for coming here to share what's happening. I'm thinking what Johanna Collinen talked about this morning, that some of the industry are disconnected from the real life, and you shared things from real life. I had a privilege to meet some of your sisters in the MENA region in Tunis last year, and you are also members of the Sisters in Film. You started to organize in the MENA region last summer, right? And tomorrow at Kala, we will have a conversation with, you will be there, Danielle, and some of the directors. You are from 7 countries in the MENA region. I hope that we can continue the discussion, how we can use our global community to support and I think, continue to talk about it and continue to share our stories. So thank you very much.
I'll bring Victoria back, and she'll round us off. Victoria, are you on your way? There you are. Fantastic. Welcome back.
Trying to get myself to not fall into the trap of being on mute. Thank you guys so much. I mean, it really hurt to hear how the art sector specifically was affected in Beirut and Lebanon. I mean, of course, what happened in August was very, very sad. But times like this is when a society needs its artists. And to hear that, quite specifically, I feel like the blast also, blew up the art. Prayers, hugs, and everything going out to you guys and to the people of Beirut and Lebanon. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing.
Thank you for hosting us.
Thank you. So, thanks, Helen. Thanks, Regina. Guys are doing an amazing job. And thank you so much to the audience for sticking with us. The next block of the program is now available for you guys to watch on demand, so you can also share with your friends, because as you know, knowledge is power. And from what we've heard today, we all do have the power. We just simply have to seize it and just move into the circle and just own our rightful place. The next block for today will be starting at 5 o'clock Central European time. If you're in the UK, that I believe is 4 p.m. And So thank you so much for being with us today, and we hope that you are really enjoying the program. We're definitely enjoying having you here with us and participating in all the discussions. Thank you.